They forced me to resign from the family business that Tuesday afternoon, citing what my sister-in-law called a persistent lack of professional conduct. Not performance issues, not financial mismanagement, not any violation they could actually document. Just lack of professional conduct. My name is Cynthia Walsh. I had spent 21 years building Walsh printing and packaging alongside my father, starting as a summer intern in the warehouse and working my way up to executive vice president of operations. Under my watch, we had tripled revenue landed contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies and modernized every plant from Boston to Hartford. Yet according to the current leadership, my conduct required immediate removal. The meeting took place in the corner office on the top floor of our headquarters in Waltham, Massachusetts. My older brother sat at the head of the table with his wife beside him, both wearing the same tight, practiced expressions. A single manila folder lay in front of me. "We're ending your role as an officer of the company. Effective immediately," my brother announced, his voice flat and businesslike. "You'll sign these separation documents and surrender your company credentials before you leave the building today." He slid the folder across the mahogany surface. Inside were 6 clean, crisp documents they clearly expected me to accept, without question: resignation acknowledgement, final compensation form, company property, return checklist, updated confidentiality agreement, restrictive covenant, and the comprehensive release that would supposedly waive every possible claim against Walsh Printing and Packaging in exchange for nothing more than my accrued wages. I opened the folder and read each page slowly, deliberately. My sister-in-law checked her watch once. My brother drummed his fingers twice. They wanted this over quickly before the plant managers downstairs heard anything, before I could walk the floor and say goodbye to the teams I had built. What neither of them realized was that I had been preparing for this exact moment for 10 weeks, ever since my brother started whispering to the board about streamlining leadership and bringing in younger voices who wouldn't challenge his vision for the company. Ever since I overheard him telling his wife that my equity stake could be better used to fund expansion, without having to share decisions with someone who still remembered how our father ran things. So I had acted. I had quietly retained counsel and reviewed every line of the old shareholder agreement our father had drafted decades earlier, the one they assumed was outdated and irrelevant. I signed the first document without hesitation. The resignation acknowledgement confirming my role ended today. I signed the second, confirming final payroll processing. I signed the property return checklist and placed my company laptop, phone, and access badge on the table. Then I reached the comprehensive release. I paused just long enough for them to notice, then added my signature exactly where required. My brother exhaled, clearly relieved that I wasn't arguing or demanding explanations. My sister-in-law offered a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for your years of service," she said, as if reading from a script. I stood, shook both their hands with perfect professionalism, and said, "It's been quite the education." I left the building at 4:47 p.m. with my head high and a mechanism quietly activated that they wouldn't discover for several more hours. The drive home took 40 minutes through rush hour traffic outside Boston. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the usual pull of unanswered emails or production deadlines. I stopped at a local market, picked up fresh salmon and vegetables, and actually cooked dinner from scratch. My husband Mark got home just after 7, surprised to find me at the stove instead of on a conference call. "You're home early," he said, loosening his tie. "I was forced to resign today," I replied calmly, turning down the heat under the pan. "For lack of professional conduct?" He stopped in the doorway, concern flashing across his face. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said. "Just wait. This is about to get very interesting." We were halfway through dinner when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered on the third ring. Cynthia Walsh. The voice was male-clipped and already strained. "This is Alan Burke, outside counsel for Walsh Printing and Packaging." My grip tightened slightly on the fork. "Right on schedule. I need to discuss the documents you executed this afternoon." He continued, words rushing together. "The resignation package," I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Silence on the line, then papers rustling. "There's specific language tied to your signature on the comprehensive release," he said, voice tightening. "Did you review that section carefully before signing?" "I reviewed every page," I answered evenly. "That's why I signed." A long pause followed. I could hear him breathing. Then, quieter than I expected from the firm's senior litigator, he asked, "Please tell me you haven't triggered the call provision yet." "I signed everything presented to me," I said. "The full separation package." His voice cracked just a fraction. "Everything." "Yes. All of it." Another stretch of silence, longer this time. Someone spoke urgently in the background. When he came back, the careful control was slipping. "Cynthia, I need you to read me the exact wording tied to your execution of the release." I didn't need to look. I had memorized it weeks ago. "Upon involuntary separation from officer duties, without documented cause under the shareholder agreement, dated November 12, 1992, signature on this release constitutes irrevocable exercise of the call option, outlined in Article 7, Sections 4 through 8. I read it slowly, clearly. The line went completely still. If you're enjoying this story about a forgotten family agreement turning the tables on corporate betrayal, hit that subscribe button right now. We post new stories about workplace and family justice every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when my brother realizes exactly what my signature just cost him. That same evening, after I set my fork down and watched Mark process what I had just told him, he leaned forward at the kitchen table. "Start from the beginning," he said quietly. "All of it." I took a slow sip of wine and began. Walsh Printing and Packaging started in a small warehouse in South Boston back in the early 80s. My father, Eugene Walsh, had borrowed everything he could from relatives and friends to buy 2 used offset presses and a folding machine. He ran the night shift himself while holding a day job at a larger printer downtown. My mother kept the books on a kitchen table after putting us kids to bed. By the time I was in high school, the company had moved to a proper facility in Waltham and was running 3 shifts. Timothy, 8 years older than me, went straight into sales after college. I spent every summer and school break on the plant floor, learning how to run every machine, how to troubleshoot ink problems, how to talk to press operators who had been there since Dad's first year. When Dad got sick 15 years ago, he made both of us executive vice presidents with equal voting shares. The shareholder agreement he drafted with his old attorney was meant to keep the company in family hands forever. Timothy became CEO after Dad passed. I stayed as executive vice president of operations and kept growing the business, bringing in digital printing capabilities, sustainable packaging lines, and the big consumer brand contracts that now make up most of our revenue. For a long time, it worked. Timothy handled the sales side and the golf course networking. I handled everything that actually produced the boxes, labels, and displays. We rarely agreed, but the numbers kept climbing. Then about 10 weeks ago, things shifted. I started noticing small moves. Longtime plant managers suddenly retired with little notice. Job postings appeared for positions reporting directly to Timothy that overlapped with mine. He stopped copying me on certain client emails. Brenda began joining board calls she had never attended before. One night, I came back to the office late to pick up a forgotten file and heard them through the half-closed door of the conference room. Timothy was telling Brenda that consolidating leadership under one vision would make the company more attractive to outside investors later. He said my share of the equity was holding back expansion because I always pushed back on risky debt. Brenda agreed that it was time for a single decision-maker. That conversation lit a fire under me. The next morning, I made an appointment with Deborah Fox, a corporate attorney I had met years earlier at an industry conference. I brought her every document I could find, Dad's original shareholder agreement, the amendments, the board minutes since his death. We spent hours going through it line by line. She pointed out one section buried in Article 7 that almost no one remembered anymore. A call option tied directly to involuntary removal from an officer role without documented cause. If either sibling was forced out of management, the other had the right within 7 days of signing any separation document to purchase all remaining family shares at a fixed valuation formula set back in 1992 and updated only once in 2005. The price was far below current market value. Timothy and Brenda had apparently forgotten it existed or assumed it had been superseded by later board resolutions. It hadn't. Deborah confirmed the clause was still fully enforceable. All it needed was my signature on a separation or resignation document to trigger the 7-day window. From that day on, I prepared quietly. I updated my personal financial records, gathered every internal valuation report I still had access to, and made sure my equity position was crystal clear. Most importantly, I reached out to Connor Vance. Connor and I had been close friends since college. We met in an entrepreneurship class at Boston University and stayed in touch even after he moved to venture capital in Cambridge. Over the years, he had backed several manufacturing and packaging startups. He knew the industry, and he knew me. 3 weeks ago, I called him for coffee. I laid out the entire situation without asking for anything specific yet. He listened, asked sharp questions about revenue multiples and plant capacity, then said, "If you ever decide to pull the trigger on that old clause, call me first. I can move fast." I told him I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but deep down, I knew it would. Mark listened to all of this without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back and rubbed his temples the way he does when he's thinking hard. "So this call option," he said finally. "You're telling me your signature today just started a 7-day clock that could let you buy out Timothy and Brenda at a fraction of what the company is worth." "Now," I nodded. "If we can raise the capital in time." He exhaled slowly. "And Connor, he's already waiting for my go-ahead." Mark looked at me for a long moment, then reached across the table and took my hand. "Then, let's make sure he gets it tomorrow." 3 days later, we sat in the conference room of Deborah Fox's downtown Boston office overlooking the harbor. Deborah had pulled every relevant document into a set of numbered binders. She explained the call option again calmly and precisely, as if discussing weather. Dad had insisted on the clause back when the company was still small, and he worried about family fights tearing it apart. The language was clear: if either of his children was removed from an officer position without formal documented cause, the affected sibling gained the irrevocable right to purchase all other family-held shares at the valuation formula locked in years earlier. The formula used book value plus a modest multiple of earnings, nothing close to today's fair market price after decades of growth. The intent had been protection. Dad never wanted the company sold to outsiders, and he certainly didn't want one child freezing out the other. He figured the discounted buyout price would deter anyone from trying to force a sibling out in the first place. Timothy and Brenda had apparently treated the old agreement like a relic. They had added newer board resolutions, hired outside directors, and taken on debt, all without ever amending that one article. Deborah confirmed it was still fully binding under Massachusetts law. My signature on the resignation documents 3 days earlier had started the 7-day clock. We now had 4 days left to deliver formal notice and close the transaction. The door opened and Timothy walked in first, followed by Brenda and Alan Burke. Timothy wore the navy suit he saved for client pitches. Brenda carried a leather portfolio and a tight smile. Alan Burke set a thick briefcase on the table and nodded politely to Deborah. They clearly expected a negotiation over severance or a quiet payout to make me go away. Timothy spoke first. "We're here to resolve this cleanly. We're prepared to offer a reasonable separation package and a neutral reference." Brenda added, "We value your past contributions, Cynthia. We just think the company needs unified leadership moving forward." Deborah slid a thin folder across the table. "My client isn't seeking severance. She's exercising her rights under the 1992 shareholder agreement." Timothy frowned. That document is 30 years old. We've superseded most of it. Not this part, Deborah said. She opened the master binder to a tabbed page and turned it toward them. Article 7 remains unchanged. Here's the executed original signed by Eugene Walsh and both children. Alan Burke leaned forward and began reading. His expression stayed neutral at first, then shifted as he reached the call option section. He flipped to the signature page, then back again. Brenda looked at Timothy. We updated the bylaws in 2017. Alan held up a hand, still reading. He pulled out his phone, scrolled quickly, then set it down. Color drained from his face as he compared the binder copy to something on his screen. Timothy noticed. What is it? Alan cleared his throat. The amendment in 2017 reorganized board structure. It never touched Article 7. This clause is still active. He turned the binder so Timothy could see the highlighted paragraph. Timothy read in silence. Brenda leaned over his shoulder, her confidence fading with each line. Deborah continued evenly. My client's execution of the resignation documents constituted involuntary separation without documented cause. The 7-day period is running. Upon formal notice, your clients are obligated to transfer all remaining Walsh family shares at the agreed formula price. Timothy finally looked up. That price is absurd. The company is worth 5 times that now. Exactly why the clause was protective, Deborah replied. It discourages exactly this kind of action. Brenda found her voice. You planned this. You waited for us to. I responded to being removed, I said quietly. It was the first time I had spoken since they arrived. Alan Burke closed the binder slowly. He looked at Timothy, then at Brenda, the realization settling in. We need to discuss this privately, he said, standing. Deborah nodded. Of course. But the clock continues. They gathered their things without another word. As Alan passed my chair, he paused just long enough for me to see it the moment a seasoned corporate attorney understood his clients had just handed their company to the person they tried to push out. Timothy stood so quickly his chair rolled back and hit the credenza. This is ridiculous, he snapped. We're not selling the company at some 30-year-old fire sale price because of a technicality. Brenda gripped his arm. Timothy, sit down. He didn't. He pointed at Deborah. You're encouraging her to steal what our family built. Deborah remained seated, hands folded on the table. I'm advising my client of her enforceable rights under an agreement your father drafted and all parties signed. Nothing more. Alan Burke tried to regain control. The clause may technically exist, but courts routinely set aside outdated provisions when they lead to unconscionable results. Forcing a sale at below market value would be punitive. Deborah opened another binder. Massachusetts courts uphold shareholder agreements with clear language, especially family ones intended to prevent exactly this kind of dispute. Here are 5 cases from the last 15 years where similar discounted buyout clauses were enforced after one sibling attempted to marginalize the other. She slid copies across. Alan took one, scanned it, then passed it to Timothy without comment. Timothy tossed it back on the table. We have outside directors now. The board can amend the agreement retroactively. No, Deborah said. The agreement requires unanimous shareholder consent for changes to Article 7. Cynthia holds 32%. She hasn't consented. Brenda leaned forward. Then we'll buy her out instead. Name your price. Deborah shook her head. My client isn't selling. She's exercising the call. The direction is fixed by the document. Alan tried a different angle. There was documented cause for the separation. Lack of professional conduct is a valid business judgment. Deborah pulled out the resignation file. Show me the documentation. Written warnings, performance reviews, board minutes, citing specific incidents. Anything that meets the agreement's definition of cause. Alan hesitated. Those discussions were confidential. Then they don't exist for purposes of the clause, Deborah replied. The resignation acknowledgement itself states the separation was involuntary and without referenced cause. Your client's own language triggers the option. Timothy's voice rose. This is blackmail. You waited until we handed you the trigger. I spoke for the second time. You handed it to me the moment you decided one vision was worth more than family. Brenda shot me a look sharp enough to cut glass. You're enjoying this? I didn't answer. Alan tried again. We'll file for injunctive relief. A judge will stay the 7-day period pending litigation. Deborah smiled for the first time. You're welcome to try. The agreement has no automatic stay provision. Filing would simply start the clock on your legal fees while the transfer proceeds. Discovery would open every board email, every text about consolidating leadership. Age of equipment debt covenants, client contracts, all fair game. She paused to let that sink in. By the time a court rules, the shares will already be transferred, and given precedent, you'll lose. Your clients would spend 2 to 3 million in fees and costs for the privilege of losing. Timothy stared at her. You're bluffing about the cost. I'm not, Deborah said. I've done this before. One case in Worcester 3 years ago cost the resisting side 2.8 million before settlement. Another in Suffolk Superior Court went 4.1. Alan leaned in close to Timothy and spoke low, but I still heard. She's right about the precedent. We're on weak ground. Timothy shoved his copies into his briefcase. We're not agreeing to this today. You don't have to agree, Deborah said. You have to comply once notice is served. The 7 days started when Cynthia signed. 4 remain. Brenda stood. You think you're so clever. Dad would be ashamed. I met her eyes. Dad wrote the clause to protect both of us. You're the ones who forgot it existed. Timothy stormed out first. Brenda followed, heels clicking hard against the wood floor. Alan lingered long enough to gather the rejected case printouts, then nodded once to Deborah and left. The door closed with a solid thud. Deborah turned to me. They'll fight for another day or two, then realize they're out of moves. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She continued. We serve formal notice tomorrow morning. That gives them 72 hours to arrange transfer or face contempt. I nodded. The room felt suddenly quieter, the harbor view outside unchanged, while everything inside had shifted. Deborah gathered her binders. Get your financing lined up. Once they accept reality, they'll want this closed fast to avoid more exposure. I already knew that part would be the easiest. Over the next week, Connor and I barely slept. We set up in his Cambridge office a converted loft filled with whiteboards and multiple monitors. He pulled in 2 of his partners and a due diligence team that worked around the clock. I handed over every internal financial report I still had legal access to as a shareholder, audited statements, plant-by-plant profit margins, client concentration breakdowns, equipment appraisals, and the multi-year contracts with major consumer brands. Everything painted a picture of steady cash flow and untapped capacity in sustainable packaging. Connor's network moved fast. He called in favors from funds that specialized in manufacturing roll-ups. Within 48 hours, we had 3 term sheets on the table. The valuations came in higher than even I expected because the industry was shifting hard toward eco-friendly materials, and our plants were already certified. We chose the lead investor who offered the most flexible terms and the quickest close. They committed the bulk of the purchase price. Connor's firm took a smaller slice for himself and his partners. 2 strategic suppliers I had known for years agreed to bridge loans against future orders. By day 5, we had firm commitments covering the full amount plus a cushion for closing costs. Throughout the process, I kept hearing updates from mutual contacts in the industry. Timothy was telling everyone I was bluffing, that I didn't have the resources to follow through. He had apparently convinced himself the discounted price was so low I would never find backers willing to touch a family dispute. Brenda was shopping for new office space, talking about rebranding once the dust settled. Alan Burke sent a cease and desist letter claiming harassment and demanding I withdraw the pending notice. Deborah responded with a single page reminding him the notice hadn't even been served yet and that any attempt to block closing would trigger daily penalties under the agreement. On the morning of the sixth day, we were ready. Deborah drafted the formal exercise notice. It was short and surgical reference to the specific article and section's calculation of the purchase price per the locked formula wiring instructions for the escrow agent and a deadline of noon the following day for acknowledgement. I reviewed it twice, signed it electronically, and watched Deborah hit send to Alan Burke, Timothy Brenda, and the company's secretary. The email went out at 9:17 a.m. Connor looked over from his screen. Now we wait for the panic to set in. I didn't have to wait long. My phone buzzed with a text from a former plant manager still loyal to me. Timothy just canceled this afternoon's sales meeting and called an emergency board session. Another message came from a supplier contact. Brenda was on the phone, trying to extend payment terms, claiming temporary liquidity issues. By early afternoon, Alan Burke replied to the notice with a holding response, requesting a 48-hour extension to review financing options on their side. Deborah shot back that no extension was available under the agreement, and that failure to tender shares by the deadline would result in immediate motion for specific performance. Connor grinned when I read it to him. They're scrambling. We spent the rest of the day finalizing wire instructions and escrow agreements. The funds were already staged, ready to move the moment shares were delivered. That evening, Mark met me at home with takeout from our favorite Italian place. He set the bags down and pulled me into a hug. "It's really happening," he said. I nodded against his shoulder. "One more day." He held me a little tighter. "You okay?" I thought about it. I'm not happy about hurting them, but I'm done letting them hurt me. The next morning arrived clear and cold. At 8:42 a.m., Deborah forwarded an email from Alan Burke. His clients would comply with the transfer to avoid further litigation. They requested closing at a neutral title company in Boston that same afternoon. Connor high-fived one of his analysts. The room erupted in quiet celebration. I stared at the screen for a long moment. After 21 years of building something with my family name on the door, I was about to own it outright. And they were about to lose everything they thought was already theirs. Closing day arrived sooner than they expected. We met at a neutral title company downtown, a bland conference room with beige walls and a long oak table. The escrow officer sat at one end with stacks of documents already prepared. I walked in with Deborah and Connor. Timothy and Brenda arrived 10 minutes late, faces drawn. Alan Burke followed, carrying a slim folder instead of the thick briefcase he usually favored. No one spoke beyond curt greetings. The escrow officer explained the process in a calm, practiced voice. Funds would wire in shares, would transfer electronically. New officer resolutions would be filed with the state by end of business. Timothy interrupted early. "We're still exploring bridge financing. If the bank comes through this afternoon," Alan cut him off quietly. "They won't. I spoke to their counsel an hour ago. The shortened timeline and pending ownership change killed the covenant compliance." Brenda's hand tightened on the table edge. "There has to be another lender." Alan shook his head. "We called every relationship we have. No one will touch it with a 7-day forced sale hanging over the company." Timothy stared at the transfer agreement in front of him. "We could refuse to sign and force her into court." Deborah spoke for the first time. "You could. The judge would order specific performance within weeks and award my clients legal fees on top. Your personal guarantees on the existing debt would accelerate. Banks don't wait for appeals." Connor added, "The funds are already in escrow. They release the moment you execute." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Brenda looked at Timothy. "We don't have a choice." He didn't answer. He picked up the pen, hesitated, then signed each page with quick, angry strokes. Brenda followed her signature, shaky. I signed last, steady and deliberate. The escrow officer notarized everything, scanned copies, and initiated the wire release. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with confirmation from the bank funds transferred shares registered in the new entity I controlled. 68%. Majority control. Deborah slid the officer resolution across. It removed Timothy as CEO and president effective immediately and appointed me in his place. Timothy stared at it. "You're firing me the same day." "The board will ratify it tomorrow," Deborah said. "But the shareholder majority can act now." Alan nodded slowly. "It's clean. No basis to challenge." Timothy pushed back from the table. 25 years I ran this place. You ran it for the last 8, I said. I built half of what's here. Brenda stood. "This isn't over. We'll find a way to." "There's nothing left," Alan told her gently. "The shares are gone. The price is paid. It's done." Timothy looked at me one last time. The anger was still there, but underneath it something else. Something closer to fear. He walked out without another word. Brenda followed, not looking back. Alan lingered to shake Deborah's hand and offer a quiet congratulations to Connor on the financing. Then he too was gone. The escrow officer gathered the executed originals. "Congratulations on your acquisition, Ms. Walsh." Connor clapped me on the shoulder. "You now own the company your father started." I looked around the empty room. The weight of it settled in not triumph exactly, but finality. That afternoon, I walked into headquarters alone. Security had already been notified. My new credentials worked at every door. The executive floor felt different. Staff glanced up as I passed, uncertainty in their eyes. I stopped at the threshold of the corner office that had been Timothy's. His personal items were already gone, boxed by facilities per the resolution. The desk was clear except for a company laptop and a single framed photo he had left behind Dad, Timothy, and me at the ribbon cutting for the Hartford plant 10 years earlier. I picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, then set it face down. By end of day, the state filing was complete. I was officially CEO. The company my father built now belonged to me, and my brother, the one who thought he could remove me without consequence, no longer had a job. A few months later, the changes at Walsh Printing and Packaging became impossible to ignore. Revenue climbed 15% in the first quarter alone. We invested heavily in new digital presses and expanded the sustainable packaging line that clients had been asking for. Suppliers extended better terms once they saw the new direction. Key accounts renewed early and added volume. Connor took a board seat and brought in operational expertise from his portfolio companies. We streamlined shifts, reduced waste, and cross-trained staff. Morale improved noticeably. People stayed late because they wanted to, not because they had to. I heard fragments about Timothy and Brenda through industry contacts who still felt loyal to the old regime. Timothy had leveraged heavily over the years to buy additional shares from distant cousins, and to fund expansions he insisted were critical. Those loans carried personal guarantees. When the share transfer wiped out their equity, the banks called the notes. They tried refinancing, but without company collateral or income, no one would touch it. The house in Weston, the one they had renovated twice, went into foreclosure. They moved into a rented condo outside the city. Brenda stopped attending the charity events she used to chair. Timothy's name disappeared from vendor golf outings. I changed my phone number and email, blocked them on every platform. When mutual relatives reached out around holidays, I kept responses short and neutral. No invitations, no updates, no openings. Blood didn't excuse betrayal. 9 months after closing, the annual Northeast Packaging Conference came to Boston. I attended as keynote speaker on sustainable substrates, a topic that now dominated our growth. During the networking break, I stood near the coffee station reviewing notes when someone approached from the side. Timothy looked thinner, suit a size too big. His hair had more gray than I remembered. "Cynthia." I turned slowly. "Timothy." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Can we talk somewhere private? I didn't move." "We can talk here." He swallowed. Things have been hard. The foreclosure closed last month. I've sent resumes everywhere. No one wants to touch someone from a family dispute that hit the trade journals. I waited. I know I deserve it, he said. But I've got 30 years in this industry. I still know sales key accounts margins. There's got to be a place for me. Even part-time. Consulting. Anything. His voice cracked on the last word. I studied him. The man who once sat at the head of the table now stood asking for scraps. I'm not hiring you, I said quietly. Not now. Not ever. He flinched. You're my sister. You stopped treating me like one the day you forced that resignation. He looked down. Brenda's not handling it well. She blames me. That's between you two. A long pause. People flowed around us, conversations buzzing. Please, he said, barely above a whisper. I'm running out of options. I felt nothing close to sympathy, only the cold clarity of consequences finally arriving. No, I said. We're done. I stepped past him toward the stage. The moderator was already calling my name. He didn't follow. That was the last time I saw Timothy. The company kept growing. We opened a fourth plant the following year. Industry awards started arriving. Clients mentioned how steady we had become under new leadership. I never looked back. Family isn't always forever. Sometimes it ends the moment trust does. 1 year after that day, I sat in the CEO office overlooking the same Waltham skyline my brother once claimed as his own. The company had never been stronger. Walsh Printing and Packaging broke every revenue record in its history, expanded to 5 plants, and became the go-to partner for sustainable packaging across the Northeast. We earned industry recognition for innovation and workplace culture. Employees stayed because they believed in the direction, not because of family ties. Connor remained my closest strategic partner. His insight and capital helped us execute faster than anyone expected. Together, we built something bigger than what existed before. Mark and I finally lived without the constant weight of corporate drama. Weekends were ours again. Travel plans actually happened. I never received another word from Timothy or Brenda. No attempts at reconciliation, no indirect messages through cousins. The door stayed closed by my choice, and theirs. Some evenings I leaned back in the leather chair and thought about everything that led here. Family businesses look unbreakable from the outside. Everyone assumes blood creates automatic trust, that shared history protects against betrayal. It doesn't. My father knew that. That's why he wrote the shareholder agreement the way he did, why he buried that call option deep in the document. He understood people change when power and money grow large enough. Timothy and Brenda forgot the fine print because they believed kinship meant they could rewrite rules whenever it suited them. They learned too late that contracts don't care about sentiment. I learned something too. Loyalty without legal clarity is just hope. Handshakes feel good until someone decides they no longer need you. The moment you become inconvenient relatives can turn faster than any stranger. That's the real lesson I carry now, and the one I share with every new leader who joins us. Read everything you sign. Understand every clause. Protect yourself with the same energy others use to protect their interests. Trust is earned daily, but enforcement is written once. Companies thrive on structure, not emotion. People who build on emotion alone watch it collapse when feelings shift. I stood at the window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching trucks load beneath the late afternoon light. The name on the building was still Walsh, but the future belonged to those who respected the rules Dad left behind. They fired me. A week later, I became their boss. And in the end, the only thing that mattered was the document they never bothered to read carefully. I smiled at the view, not out of bitterness, but from the quiet satisfaction of knowing preparation and principle win over assumption and entitlement every single time. If you're running a family company or working in one, remember this: blood may be thicker than water, but ink on a signed agreement is thicker than blood. Protect your future the way my father protected mine, because no one else will do it for you.